Um, Welcome everyone to our seminar series, seminar number 1 for the Oxford University Polar Forum. I just wanted to briefly talk about the Polar Forum. It's going to take 40 seconds before I introduce our speaker today, Tom Hart, who's here in front of a penguin colony. And I just wanted to say that the Polar Forum is meant to basically provide 2 services to the polar community in our university. One would be to highlight the research that we produce as a community from the university, and the other would be to serve as a hub where polar researchers within the university can meet and discuss various aspects of polar research. I wanted to also ask, well, basically thank many of you who have contacted in the last few weeks when we have started being a bit active, so that they can be added to both the mailing list and the website. The bigger, the better. So the bigger, the better, and the closer we will be into actually working as a polar community. But having said that, please, if you know of anyone working in polar research within the university who is not aware or who might not be aware of this initiative, let them know and tell them to contact us. One last thing about the Polar Forum is that recently we received some money from the Van Houten Fund from the university, which is not an amazingly large sum, but should help us organize several events over the next year, which will include not only a seminar series this term, but several other seminar series during the coming academic year, apart from other events that we will inform you about as they get organized and occur. So having said that, I'm reminding you that we are recording this so that we will make this video available. Let me introduce you to Dr. Tom Hart, who's based at the Department of Zoology here at the university. Tom has quite a long experience in organizing expeditions to Antarctica and also the sub-Antarctic islands, where he has spearheaded a remote monitoring of remote penguin colonies using time-lapse cameras and other devices and citizen science. You might be familiar with Penguin Watch. That's something that Tom is deeply involved with. And lately, Tom has also expanded this approach to seabird colonies in the high Arctic. So welcome, Tom. And today, Tom wants to discuss about what it takes to organize polar expeditions from the university, and which are the key aspects that he identifies as key and important in this organization. So hopefully you can share the screen, Tom. Just go ahead, and I will mute myself.
Sorry, Mark, you need to enable that.
And I need to enable that more. So probably if I make you host, you will be able to.
That carries a risk.
You're host now. You should be able to share screen.
Okay. Can you see that, or are you seeing my notes?
I see you on top of in front of a hat, so cool. With a Scottish flag. So probably that's what you want to show, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Great.
I'll mute myself.
Cool. Well, firstly, thank you, everyone. So I'm delighted that the Polar Forum exists, and I think I want to, being one of the first to speak, I very much want to stamp some ideas of what I want to get out of it, and also what I would like to share. So I'd like to talk about, is that working? Not working. Sorry, technical glitch. This is not. Okay, now it's working. So yeah, I'd like to talk about planning polar programs, what that means in general, and particularly what it means within the university. So the big problem of anywhere polar is that it's obviously remote, it's obviously extreme, and it costs on average 7 times the amount to put this researcher here than it does anywhere, any other field work that the university does. And that is one of the biggest limitations. We are very expensive in terms of our training, our deployment, and also the kind of the risks and what it means for someone to come and get us if they can. So I want to think about what we can share, how we can help each other with this. I think looking around the Polar Forum at who's involved, there are clearly a lot of expertise and a lot of scientific questions that I hope we will share within this hub, particularly the biotic meeting abiotic expertise for some of my research questions, and just generally also being able to present our science within a forum that is more understanding than the rest of the university in general, and a bit more keyed up and also understand some of the challenges. So I think we can really gain from that. But what I want to talk about is more on field skills, on risk assessment, and things we need to do to be safe and organize things within the university environment. So as Mark mentioned, I run a network of time-lapse cameras. We do diet and disease monitoring as well, all around the Southern Ocean. We all know that, I mean, why we work in the polar regions is because there are some quite big challenges. I mean, there are huge gaps in monitoring. There are large research questions that you can't answer elsewhere, as well as massive gains to be had. But of course, that comes with danger. And what I would like to start the ball rolling by getting a load of resources in the public domain that we can help each other plan these safely and also get more science done. Hopefully you recognize this is the worst journey in the world. I was 24 when I first went south, which is the same age as actually Jerry Gerard, the young, haggard-looking fella on the right. So there you go, that's what I used to look like. And I've been very lucky and privileged to get to some of the most remote places on Earth as part of my science and because my science. So I think it's a real privilege to be able to study these things. And also, obviously, there are huge gains to be got there by working in the polar regions. Now, a bit of a brag. We now have an award-winning risk assessment. We just won a British Standards Award for trust in remote travel. So I will be talking about this quite a lot. This is the British Standard 8848, named because that's the height of Everest, and they thought that was a nice venture and risky example. But what that means is I very much want to share lessons. So this award, I feel, gives me the confidence to actually expose a bit and to say what I think we've done well and badly. So I really worry that a lot of us hide in risk assessments, in that we really want to go places, we really want to do our science, but we're worried that actually, if we're truly honest, the university won't let us, or that things will be hard. So I want to share lessons and also share documents that can make it easy for other people. This is a book I really enjoyed as a kid. I haven't read it in years. It is very good. Very relevant though, because when I read that as a kid, Ranulph Fiennes was definitely a hero to me. Now I think he's a bit of a pillock who goes on polar expeditions with a heart condition and a defib within a few paces of him at all times, which would be fine if it was up to him, but you know, he's hardly a team player and putting his team at risk. But despite that, there are really, really good lessons in this, and I'd encourage us to develop this kind of circle of trust where we can speak clearly without judgment, and to share lessons learned. So with that, feeling emboldened to confess my sins, I will talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly. So this is the good. Hopefully we all know this. This is this feeling of the planning. So this was something that took just over, probably 3 years of planning, 2 years of training, and an actual putting stuff in place. Now, this was a trip where we wanted to ski into Snow Hill Island. Snow Hill Island is on the east side of the Antarctic Peninsula. We were going to get dropped by a small yacht and ski over the sea ice, which 9 times out of 10 was firm enough, to get and spend nearly 2 weeks studying emperor penguins at Snow Hill. It's the northernmost emperor penguin colony on the peninsula, so there was relevance to population genetics, and also selection on certain heat stress genes. Now, as I said, 9 times out of 10 this would be fine. Usually there is not a lot of sea ice on the West Antarctic Peninsula at this time of year, and firm sea ice on the firm sea ice on the east. So 9 times out of 10 this would have worked. However, with less than a month to go, we got this, which was the first satellite image of the season. Things have come on a lot, even since this, with Polar View. But there was a lot of sea ice to the west. We would have had to be landed on sea ice that was not in an embayment. It could have blown out with a change in the weather. And so after all of that fundraising, training, and planning, we called it off with less than a month to go. I say this is the good because this is one of my proudest achievements. It was heart-wrenching, but we made the right call, and miraculously we're even able to rapidly replan some logistics with another provider and get to do nearly the same study in the Weddell Sea, but at a very different location. So the bad, this is largely bad. This is getting bitten by an Antarctic fur seal in South Georgia. Bad because I think this was avoidable. We were camping, 2 of us camping in Fortuna Bay. A large bull charged me and took a chunk out of my leg. Avoidable because this was going to the toilet after dinner, just about to get into bed. You know, why travel on your own? I did have a stick, but something that, you know, we encountered these guys all the time. This, in retrospect, seems avoidable. The potential of this was pretty huge. This was about 1.5 inches away from my femoral artery, and I could have very quickly bled out without even my tent mate knowing where I was. He was doing the washing up at the time. The good of this was that I really recommend the intensive first aid courses we do. So I'll put links in later, but we do a lot of wilderness medical training with a company called Wilderness Medical Training Limited. It does equip us, and there's no doubt that while this put a pause to the expedition, that it actually saved it from having to be medevaced. The ugly is because I don't know what we'd have done about this. Not a lot. We had we were on an expedition to the Danger Islands. This was counting one of the world's largest penguin colonies that was relatively unknown. We had a sudden change in the weather and the forecast, and the wind started blowing from the south in the Weddell Sea. There was no shelter, and we were in amongst some pretty big icebergs that were moving around and were actually closing up. So it was a horrible place to be. We had to do a fast run away to get to the north side of the Antarctic Peninsula and Joinville Island, to the point where we could get some shelter. It was severe storm, near hurricane force winds by the time we got into the bay. We did this under radar, and it was a place called Ambush Bay, which we should have realized. The only place we could get the anchor to hold was right under a glacial face. It's stupidly dangerous. We ran out of options. So this is the ugly. I don't know what to take from this, other than I think that is my riskiest moment in either poles. And yet it's very hard to think what we could have done about it. We just ran out of options and ran out of luck. But setting that tone, I want to think about, in general, how can we do it so we're less like the Scott and Shackletons of the world and more like the Charcots. So this is very much what I think we should all be aspiring to be like. So collecting data in a safe way, and getting home relaxed and to analyze it. This is Mike Polito. We very much, before we had our own students, we said safety third, or we had a moniker that we would always say as we went out the door, which was it look good, have fun, stay safe. Then we got students, and now it's we spend a lot less time sleeping. So it's not just your team that you need to worry about. I think there is a huge burden from being a part of the university. Now, you carry a huge amount of expectation, and there is more scrutiny on you as a result. The reputational damage that you can do yourselves in the university is pretty huge. And that is something that I really think we need to think of as we start opening up post-COVID. So Greenland, for example, has very few cases. There are isolated communities throughout the Arctic with local populations that may be more or less resistant to COVID. And you know, there's a horrible history of diseases coming with people into remote areas. So we should be incredibly thoughtful about that as things start to open up post-COVID. So improving safety. Now, this is something that, as it turns out, is a British standard that largely we will be judged against if anything goes wrong. Yet I can guarantee that very few people will have heard of it. It is continually updated, but this is what all of the universities in the UK have signed up to. And this is what our risk assessment is meant to be, what it's meant to be compliant with. Now, this is something that we spent the last 3 years. This is what we won the award for, because it turns out very few people do it, and we really embraced it. So I realize how much paperwork it looks like I'm putting onto people, but this is something that either on the bad side might keep you out of prison if things go wrong. On the good side, it really will increase our ability to conduct remote science safely. So the British Standard consists of a lot of different things, but it's basically proving that your planning is safe, proving competencies, and detailing all the plans you need for what they deem essential to get there, conduct your fieldwork safely, and get home. Importantly, it's things like how contingencies and emergencies and crises. One of the big things that is a change, and again, a lot of this is quite unnerving when you go through it, is to work out whether you and your people are competent and to write those down against what a peer would judge in the field. So, for example, the third-party venture provider, how do you work out if you're getting transport from someone, how do you work out that they are competent? Are you asking the right questions? Don't forget that in general, in field work, within that, I include, within field work, I also include rescue workers and overseas aid workers. Car crashes are the main form of death. What people forget when they're on field work, to wear a safety belt when they don't see other people wearing it. Some really important things like that are things we need to have processes for in place so that people do them every time that we assess them before we get in a vehicle, for example. Our risk assessment is now, I think it's about 80 pages. And one of we have two things that I think we can really learn from this that, by the way, I'm going to make all of this available other than the polar bear risk assessment, and I'll come to that shortly. The thing that I think is very nice is that because we work at both poles, zoology have let us do one risk assessment. So we're continually updating the entire thing. People need to then go through the whole risk assessment and identify in a signature sheet what is important to them. And they need to sign it. They need to sign to say they're acknowledging the code of conduct. They're signing which risk assessments are relevant to them and which they might have to put in place. And of course, if you've identified an additional risk assessment but not put something in place, then it's nonsense to sign it. So it's quite an important accountability step that I think makes people realize what they're getting into. Another really important thing that I would encourage, you can see down, we've got some general things that are important to everyone, everywhere, and then specifics. Things like code of conduct. Importantly, code of conduct of others as well, and we will come to that. But one of the things I think we've done really well is the dynamic risk assessment. So we're actually, as part of our training and as part of our risk assessment, we're getting everyone to sign up to this, this process whereby before you do any one action, let's say go ashore in a small boat, you agree amongst your team what the risks are and who is looking out for what and what to do if it changes. So that democratizes things a bit. For example, if I'm down as relatively experienced, but with a first-time student, then I can democratize the risk assessment by saying that mountain, that sea state, every 5 minutes, look at that mountain and see where the cloud is. Is it coming down? Is it coming down faster? So things like that really help both teach people in the field and generate awareness. The polar bears, so as I said, I'm happy to share all of this. I'm trying to provide references to polar bears. I think this in particular is something that we need to maybe standardize a bit more across the university, because a lot of people are working in polar bear territory. It's the one I can't share because it actually relies on Quark Expedition's training manual, and I can't share the intellectual property. But we include that in our risk assessment because I think it's very important to use the same protocols as who we're working with. But of course, yeah, that's something I think that we can work on together. I have also organised a polar bear training course in the UK that might be possible to get several people on, or that we can run as and when we have enough people to share their costs. I talked about the code of conduct. I think this is really important, and I wanted to talk about this as within and outside the risk assessment. I mean, obviously, we have big challenges of diversity in general, let alone in the polar regions. But there's it goes beyond that. There's how do you get a team to work well together? One of I'm sure all think of scenarios where we've been stressed with teammates in the field, and that actually should be part of the training to get people to think of that. How do you share jobs? How do you avoid resentment over the washing up, building up? Or in the case of this fella, how do you avoid things building up to the point where you stab your colleague? Sexual harassment is certainly an issue in Antarctica. Now, we include this in the risk assessment, and I think actually increasingly we need to include racism and racial harassment as well as an explicit thing. A couple of years ago, we did have an incident within our wider team where someone was sexually harassed, and the one good thing we take from that was that the actions were followed pretty well. The guy in question was sacked. It was raised by both the researcher in question and her teammate. It was escalated to the expedition leader and the captain, and the guy in question was sacked on the spot. He was confined to his quarters and kicked off the ship on the next port call. It's a positive story in the sense that there was an action. But the other positive we took from that was that the team members had actually discussed this ahead of time. And I think that was one of the big learning points for this having a relatively positive outcome, was that they worked together well as a team and they trusted each other, and they had discussed what to do beforehand. Certainly when we are pitching lifts on cruise ships in the future, I think racism is going to be a huge issue in a post-COVID world. You think we have a lot of Chinese guests on board and a lot of American guests on board, and there is no doubt there is going to be uncomfortable incidents as a result of that. I think that goes without saying, and we need to plan for it, as well as within our smaller teams. I'm very aware that most people out of Oxford are not working on ships in the way we are, but the same for field camps and small vessels. Another thing I think that has been really good, I don't know if this is worth sharing, but definitely checklists that include the whole team. So as part of that 8848 validation and assessment, we've had to say, what are the minimum requirements for each person to be included in fieldwork? So how have we chosen people, and how do we sign them off? And for example, so we now do that as an online checklist. Not everyone needs everything. For example, if you're a first-time collaborator or student, we don't require you to have advanced first aid, but we do require you to have something. So this checklist we go through, and we agree with each person what skills and sign-offs they need to have. before they can go. So once we know what is sufficient, then we work away at that until this whole table turns green, and then people are fit and signed off to go. You do, of course, need, in some cases, continual sign-off, and you need them to be able to report last-minute issues that may well be an issue or may be fixable. Health changes, for example. Again, I can share this, and I think it could be a whole separate talk on both communications and crisis management. And I think this is absolutely vital that there are good plans in place. Now, we always carry, we'll come to this in a moment, we always carry the same survival kit, even if we require more than that basic survival kit. We now have a system where everyone, when they're off the ship or away from camp, in their rucksack, they have a bivy bag, some water, some food, some kind of lifeboat ration type things, communications, spare batteries for radios, and means of calling help. And this Don't Panic guide really helps with that. This is a double laminated sheet, excuse me, that goes into the survival kit. So the survival kit is two dry bags within each other, and this laminate is in the outer one. So it's the first thing you get out. It can be very helpful. I speak from first-hand experience when I was bitten by that fur seal. The doctor who had trained us up, who wasn't with us in the field, had produced laminated guides for exactly that scenario. She had a Don't Panic guide for general emergencies, and she had a Don't Panic guide for bites. And it really helped to go down that checklist when adrenaline was pumping. And actually, you'll see that in a lot of cases, this fits in with some very general risk assessment and emergency protocols, even if we were in Oxford. But it is writing it down in a way that someone can follow it when they're high on adrenaline. Something that I think is really important and is not really explicit in the university health and safety forms that you have to do for overseas travel is really think through a crisis and what you're going to do. Now, we've tackled this by having several scenarios, and we have, again, I'm happy to share this. And by the way, I'm feeling empowered to share this because we've been signed off, we've been accredited and recognized. There is no way you aren't going to find faults with it and things to improve. So I very much want to turn this into more of a wiki and a community plan where we can all share data and improve each other's. But one of the things we do relatively well is explicitly plan for a crisis. Those really unlikely events, but that would be catastrophic. If they may be catastrophic anyway, but if you haven't planned for them, they could be really serious. Life and limb threatening and life-changing. So particularly we're thinking about contingencies in our action plan. Our action plan is what happens if we get stranded ashore, what happens if a vessel sinks, what happens if someone gets hurt badly. They almost certainly come down to appropriate training, kit that can mitigate it, and communications. But something really important to think through, and like I say, I'll share all of these documents, and we really welcome feedback. Something that I think another thing we've been quite bad at is really thinking about the training and accreditation before we take people into the polar environment. A recent new organization is the Polar Tourism Guides Association. I've just been through this accreditation, and it was quite a lot of work to meet their standards. But I'm now a senior polar guide, and I definitely recommend you looking at their syllabuses. And certainly if you're taking people in to the polar regions where you are the person in charge, think about how to accredit as a basic or senior polar guide. I think the basic is very achievable. A surprising amount of their courses are available. So they actually don't provide training, but they do point towards people who do. And this is actually a really good way to think about your risk assessment and training. So they, like I say, they don't offer training, but they do offer accreditation. And that is either by doing a validated course or being grandfathered in where you demonstrate competence through experience. The grandfathering scheme is just closed. So in a way, I wish I'd talked about this a year ago, but they're a relatively young organization, but really, really coming on, and something we ought to think about in the same terms. Yes, we might not be guiding paying guests, but we're certainly assuming responsibility in a very remote and hostile environment. And I'll put a whole load of links, but there are some absolutely fantastic courses that are now available that are tying in, because the Polar Tourism Guides Association have created the market. There are now a whole load of courses that are bespoke and offered to the polar regions. This one, working with search and rescue helicopters, the same organization over in the Netherlands, offers Zodiac training. So flat bottom boat training of the type that's far more common in the polar regions than would be common if you do your RYA level 2, that is otherwise the standard. I mentioned Wilderness Medical Training Limited, and they are certainly the gold standard in the UK, and I thoroughly recommend them. And that's something where I think really that we as a forum we could help by getting a load of people together and reducing the cost of running these in Oxford. I have run one of these in Oxford, and yeah, the costs, if we can have a full house in Oxford rather than going to Scotland or the Lake District, keeps these costs down a lot. And we can't get away from the fact that to adequately do some of these training courses for polar regions, we work in a very expensive place. And so we need to do everything we can to prove competency and yet keep these costs down. Mark has already mentioned this. So we are now starting to we're now starting to record some of these training plans. This was before COVID, but we're definitely going to keep going after. And I certainly want to make these more available. We have this on a private YouTube channel, but we will be making these available similarly in the Polar Forum. I'd like it if these were behind a password, but yeah, as open as possible. One other thing we can get from the forum. So, I mean, I've already mentioned, science outreach and just reaching people with similar interests. I mentioned all the kind of risk assessment, training. Kit is quite a relevant one. Now, there are a bunch of us with sat phones that only use them for part of the year. This is an expensive inReach. They've actually now got as cheap as £250. And this is a text-based satellite communicator. So it enables things like WhatsApp around the world. So really good. Not only can it act as an EPIRB and report your position and emergencies, but it can also be used for texting. So increasingly really useful where comms are challenging. But in some kit, I mean, I'm very defensive of a lot of our kit because I don't want to lend it out and have it worn out, sorry. But things like this, I think we could really have a pool where we could share contracts. So people who aren't using them worldwide, year round, we can pair them up with people with the opposite field season, for example. The other thing I'm very keen to get out is skills training. Now, some of these skills like time-lapse, image analysis, and citizen science are more widely used across the university, but they're really relevant to the polar regions. So I'm happy to have kind of training sessions, but also I want to think about what skills others have and what they could run to cross-train people. There's no doubt that drones are an absolute game changer in the polar regions, massively for safety, as well as being really useful for getting a lot of data. So here we are, I think off Savadovsky Island in the South Sandwich Islands, where it was far too rough to land, but we were still able to get 90% of the data we wanted. The law, the rules, and the risk assessment and insurance for the university has changed to the point where we could now run courses ourselves and do this on an accreditation based on experience, where to some degree you're self-trained. And we can do that because we're working in remote areas. So we're not subject to the same rules as when most people want to use drones in the UK. But that's something I'm very interested in, is sharing experience and actually running courses ourselves so that we can reduce the cost of it. When myself and Nacho did this, it was 800 quid each. We put 3 or 4 people through this in the end. And I thought this was a complete waste of time, given the skills we needed, we actually had to gain through experience. And so yes, something very keen to help with, as well as learn from other people. We might also think about software and techniques that are common between us, particularly in remote sensing, GIS skills for training, and also the packages involved. So this is Arisoft MetaShape, quite expensive on its own, but maybe if enough people are using this for remote monitoring, something that we can get on a university or site license. So that's it from me. And I very much wanted to, I wanted to set my ideas and impressions on this, but I really want this to become something where we all exchange and learn from each other. From my point, I just wanted to set the tone, and that I'm more than happy to speak freely and confess to all these things that we've got away with, so that other people can learn from. And I really hope you guys are happy to follow that as well. Thanks. Any questions?
Thank you, Tom. Well, it's been very practical to listen to you, and not only on the non-polar forum related issue of how to organize fieldwork in a remote area, and how to be aware of so many things, but also on the aspects of how actually our young organization can actually help, basically making some of these resources more cost efficient by basically collaborating. So that's great. I have some questions, but there were some questions in the text that you might wanna
largely people
first.
were saying, sorry, I'm leaving. Must have been something I said. So I'll catch up with people later. But Maria Dance says, up until now, what polar bear protocols have Oxford researchers been following during fieldwork? I'm only familiar with the UNIS protocol. Well, maybe we can compare. I mean, Mark, what do you use?
We have only used the UNIS protocol, so probably Maria is in the same boat.
Right. So I've used the Norwegian polar protocol. Quark expeditions who did they kind of do training before every trip. And in the first couple of years, we had to come up with our own, which was quite worrying. So since I've got a lot reviewed by a colleague who worked for the Canada Parks and Wildlife Service, and really he's an expert. You know, he was meeting polar bears in remote fieldwork every day, and for years. So I couldn't find anyone more expensive. There's also Nikolai, I've forgotten his surname, who's a polar bear researcher. So he's given us a lot of advice on this. It's got to be said that while UNIS is fairly good in their training, Svalbard is one of the worst places on Earth for polar bear encounters. The problem is these are firearms. So there's such stringency on local laws. In Norway, where they have a hunting tradition, it's fine to own a rifle, but they don't like shotguns. So they have some very good rules, like you're not allowed to have a scope, because the idea is you should have your head up and you should only be firing when a polar bear has repeatedly shown hostile intentions. So yeah, we've been following a hybrid of the UNIS approach, but when you look at the frequency of negative encounters elsewhere, it has to be said that Svalbard is one of the worst. It's got one of the highest rates of shootings compared to encounters. Now it's a small archipelago where people do come into contact with polar bears. The other problem with the local laws is that Norway bans bear spray, and there's some evidence that that might be a good deterrent. Practical things that so this is Mark and I from Cork University. We collaborate on seabird watch in the north. And we haven't taken any students to Svalbard yet, but we will be. One of the big things is definitely spending money on ammunition and practicing. Definitely getting a trainer who puts you under stress. So, you know, we now have this protocol where we have to run around for a whole bunch of times before we're allowed to start firing. It was very hard to get hold of flashbangs for practice for the first few years. And now I think we've been doing this 5 years now. And it was only in the last year that we had enough money and we could pre-book to get flashbangs to use in a training setting. And there's absolutely no doubt that a couple, like two to four of those, both us doing 2 each and seeing other people doing it, is really good training, and it definitely changes how you would act in an encounter. So yes, there's UNIS protocols. There's others in Russia. There's others in Canada, and there's very different weaponry and non-lethal deterrent that you're allowed to carry. There's also differences in camping between whether you have to take a husky as an alert or whether you're allowed tripwires and things like that. But this is another great thing about the Polar Tourism Guides Association, sorry, the PTGA, is that they have forums like this where people talk, they get experts sharing knowledge on this. And I'm not sure they're useless, but those tripwires, there's so many stories of bears getting through them that it's certainly not something you can rely on. So as I say, I'm going to try, and I can't share that component of our risk assessment. It's huge. It's about 30 pages and it is very useful, but it's not our intellectual property. So I'm going to try and take the links out of it that are open access and share those.
So thanks, Tom. One question I had regarding this kind of a situation in which we can self-train because we work in remote areas. In the Antarctica, that might be relatively evident, but in the Arctic, remoteness is nearly a culturally loaded word, because in general, when you are in the Arctic, there is somebody living there. who would call it home, and hence, remote would be London. So what defines remote, and in terms of our activity and how this approach can be taken?
I mean, there are several different kind of axes you could think of remoteness on, but I meant very specifically time to get help.
All
and
right.
time to get help in depending on what is needed. So definitive care, that could be anything from shelter and safety to medical concerns where you might need something that could be served by a regional hospital, or kind of mainland definitive care, resetting broken bones, well, anything that needed an operation or kind of definitive care at hospital. So that's what I mean by remote. And I really appreciate, that, I take that point, but at the same time, we're working in two different cultures, and we are responsible, and the university is responsible for us. So, it's a two-way thing with the university, where we need to take appropriate risks that the university are signing off. And don't forget that, they need to agree it, and we need to follow whatever they've agreed.
Good. Well, thank you, Tom. I think that was a very, as I said, useful first seminar in which we should follow up on that. I think there were many ideas that we should further discuss as a community and try to see if we can actually get somewhere in terms of getting some resources put together. Maria is writing again.
Okay,
it would also be good to have shared resource in the Polar Forum fieldwork for fieldwork research funding, like a Google Doc. That could be yet another one. I had identified a pool of risk assessments, a pool of shared equipment or shareable equipment, a pool with skills training opportunities, and then software techniques. We can add the research funding as well as another available source of information.
How do you envisage me sharing? So the stuff I promised to share today, how do you envisage sharing that?
Yeah, we can talk about that. We have a website, and we could set up a space in the website for sharing several resources that could be interesting for the community. So that could be plan A. But because this is your material that we're starting with, we can discuss about details, and we would inform the forum
I think we need the one disclaimer we need is that if you're using these, you take responsibility. So I think, we need some kind of disclaimer and shared license whereby you're absolutely free to take it, but there is, there's no implied, what do you call it? So basically, a disclaimer that means you're absolutely free to use all of this, but you take responsibility for the content and checking the validity of it, if you do.
Good. Any other comments or questions from the audience? No. All right. There were some mentions of drones. Actually, I see that there is a drone association in Oxford. Probably are familiar with it. So that would be another group that we could actually link up with in that particular aspect. But anyway, I don't want to make this needlessly longer. I will share in the mailing list the link to the recorded lecture today. And all that's left to do is a couple of things. First of all, to thank Tom for having put the time and effort for this seminar. To thank you all for coming, and also to invite you to next week. Next week there is not going to be a Oxford Polar Forum seminar, because the Oxford Climate Research Network is inviting Professor Richard Alley from Penn State, who's going to be talking about sea level rise from ice sheet melt, and we thought that that would definitely be of interest for all of us. So we invite you to attend that talk next Thursday. And that's it. That's it. Thanks a lot, and see you in the future.
Thank you, Mark, and hi to everyone.